The cardboard box felt heavy in my arms as I stood in the driveway, watching my father toss the last of my belongings into the trunk of my beat-up Honda Civic. My mother stood in the doorway, arms crossed, her expression cold and distant. The spring air was warm, but I felt a chill run through my body. "You have until the end of the day to get your stuff out," my father said, his voice eerily calm. "Your sister needs the space for her piano and study materials. She's actually doing something with her life." I looked up at my bedroom window, my sanctuary for 18 years, where my 16-year-old sister Amber was already measuring for new curtains. Just yesterday, I had told my parents I wanted to defer college to pursue music production. 24 hours later, I was homeless. "Mom, please," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I just need a little time to figure things out." She shook her head, disappointment etched into every line of her face. "We didn't raise you to be a dreamer, Alex. We raised you to be successful." The front door slammed shut with a finality that shattered something inside me. As I turned the key in the ignition, I caught a glimpse of Amber waving gleefully from my window. My window. I pulled away from the only home I'd ever known, tears streaming down my face, wondering how the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally could discard me so easily. 6 months into my new life in a dingy studio apartment on the outskirts of Boston, I was barely keeping my head above water. I worked double shifts at a coffee shop during the day and washed dishes at a bar at night, all while trying to build my music portfolio in the precious few hours between jobs. The apartment was a far cry from my spacious bedroom in my parents' suburban home. The walls were paper thin, the plumbing temperamental, and the neighbors loud. But it was mine, paid for with my own money, and that gave me a sense of pride I'd never experienced under my parents' roof. Every Sunday, like clockwork, my phone would ring. It was always my mother, her voice a mixture of concern and condescension. "How are you doing, Alex? Have you reconsidered community college? Your father and I would help with tuition if you choose a practical major." And every Sunday, my answer was the same. "I'm fine, Mom. I'm sticking with music." Then came the updates about Amber. How she had aced another exam. How her piano recital had drawn a standing ovation. How she'd been accepted into a prestigious summer program. "Your old room looks amazing now," my mother said during one call. "We converted half of it into a music room for Amber's piano. She's thriving with the extra space." I hung up and stared at my makeshift studio, a second-hand laptop, a MIDI keyboard from a pawn shop, and acoustic foam stapled to the walls. My latest rejection email from a record label glared from my screen. That night, I cried myself to sleep for the first time in months, wondering if my parents had been right all along. By the 1-year mark, the rejections had piled up, and my resolve was weakening. My hands were perpetually raw from dish soap, my eyes constantly heavy from lack of sleep. My apartment had been broken into twice, and I'd lost some of my equipment. When my mother called to invite me to Amber's high school graduation party, I almost declined. The thought of facing my parents' smug expressions and fielding questions from relatives about my gap year made my stomach churn. But some masochistic part of me needed to see them, to prove I was surviving. The house looked exactly the same, except for the new honor student bumper sticker on my mom's car. Inside, relatives milled about, congratulating Amber and my parents. My father gave me a stiff handshake as if I were a stranger. My mother hugged me briefly, then immediately turned to introduce Amber to a distant cousin. "Oh, and this is Alex," she added as an afterthought. "He's finding himself right now." The cousin smiled politely, then eagerly returned to asking Amber about her scholarship offers. I wandered upstairs, drawn to my old room like a moth to flame. The transformation was complete. No trace of me remained. My posters had been replaced by Amber's academic awards. My closet now housed her extensive wardrobe. My desk, where I'd spent countless hours creating music, now supported her shiny new laptop and textbooks. As I stood there, Amber appeared in the doorway. Like what I did with the place, she smirked. Dad says they should have given me this room years ago. It was wasted on you. Something inside me cracked. I brushed past her and stormed downstairs, ignoring my mother's calls. As I reached my car, my father caught up to me. You could learn something from your sister, he said. It's not too late to get serious about your future. I looked him dead in the eyes. I am serious about my future, just not the one you planned for me. As I drove away, I made a promise to myself I would never set foot in that house again. 2 years after being kicked out, I reached my breaking point. 3 consecutive record labels had rejected my demos. My second job had cut my hours. My landlord had raised the rent. I sat on my mattress on the floor, surrounded by pizza boxes and empty energy drink cans, and contemplated giving up. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Amber made Dean's List her first semester. Thought you'd want to know. Something snapped inside me. The constant comparison, the subtle digs, the blatant favoritism, it all crystallized into a burning resolve. I was done living in Amber's shadow, done trying to earn my parents' approval. That night, I stayed up until dawn, fueled by anger and determination, creating the most honest track I'd ever produced. It was raw, emotional, filled with the pain of rejection and the fire of resilience. I titled it Discarded, and instead of sending it to record labels, I uploaded it directly to SoundCloud and every streaming platform I could access. Then I did something I'd never done before. I recorded a video of myself performing the track, speaking candidly about being kicked out by my family, and posted it online. It was terrifying, exposing my pain to the world, but also cathartic. This is for anyone who's been told they're not good enough, I said at the end of the video. Your worth isn't determined by those who should love you unconditionally but don't. It's determined by you. I pressed upload, then collapsed into an exhausted sleep, not expecting anything to come of it. 5 years earlier, on my 16th birthday, my parents had given me my first MIDI controller. It wasn't much a basic model they'd found on sale, but it was the most thoughtful gift they'd ever given me. You're always tapping rhythms on everything, my mother had said, smiling. Maybe this will keep your fingers busy. My father had ruffled my hair. Who knows? Maybe you'll be the next big producer. For months after, they'd listen to my amateur beats, offering encouragement and suggestions. My mother would dance in the kitchen to my tracks. My father would nod along while reading the newspaper. Then Amber had started winning academic competitions, bringing home trophies and certificates. Gradually, my music became noise and a distraction. My creativity became wasting time. My dreams became unrealistic fantasies. The breaking point had come when Amber complained that my music was disrupting her study time. Amber needs quiet to concentrate, my mother had said. Maybe you could use headphones? Or practice less. That same week, they'd bought Amber a new laptop for achieving the highest GPA in her class. My request for music production software was met with lectures about priorities and the real world. The contrast was stark and painful. It wasn't just that they favored Amber, it was that they had once supported me too. They had planted the seed of my passion, then systematically uprooted it when it didn't bloom according to their expectations. Remembering this as I lay in my apartment, I realized that what hurt most wasn't losing my room or even my home. It was losing my parents' belief in me, a loss that had started long before they physically kicked me out. 3 months after posting Discarded, I was working my coffee shop shift when a woman in an impeccable suit approached the counter. Instead of ordering, she slid a business card across to me. Meera Patel, Breakout Records, she said. Your track has over 1 million streams, and your video has gone viral. We need to talk. I stood frozen, certain I was hallucinating. But Meera was real, and so was her offer, a meeting with her label's executives the following week. After my shift, I met Meera at a nearby cafe. She was straightforward and passionate. Your story resonates with people, she explained. But more importantly, your sound is unique. Raw talent combined with genuine emotion that's rare. I listened, stunned, as she outlined what the label could offer: a modest advance, studio time, mentorship from established producers, and marketing support. This isn't charity, Mira emphasized. We believe you can be profitable. But know this: the music industry is brutal. You'll face rejection and criticism far worse than anything your parents dished out. Are you ready for that? Her honesty was refreshing. She wasn't promising fame or fortune, just an opportunity. And unlike my parents, she was offering it because of my music, not despite it. I've spent 2 years being told I'm not good enough, I said. I'm used to fighting uphill battles. Mira smiled. That's exactly the attitude you'll need. But remember, success isn't about proving your parents wrong. It's about proving yourself right. Those words hit me like a thunderbolt. For years, my motivation had been spite, showing my parents they'd made a mistake. But Mira was right. This had to be about me, not them. I signed with Breakout Records the following week. The next 2 years were a whirlwind. My debut EP, Foundations, built on the success of Discarded, and caught the attention of a prominent DJ who featured my tracks in his sets. Collaborations followed, then festival bookings, then a full album deal. I moved from my dilapidated studio to a modest but comfortable apartment in a safer neighborhood. I quit my coffee shop and dishwashing jobs. For the first time since leaving home, I was financially stable, doing what I loved. Through it all, I maintained radio silence with my family. My mother's calls had dwindled to monthly, then stopped altogether when I never returned them. I heard updates through distant relatives. Amber had graduated college early, was in law school now, still the golden child. I was in the middle of a session with another artist when my phone rang with an unknown number. Normally I'd ignore it, but something made me step outside to answer. Is this Alex Mercer? The voice was unfamiliar. Yes, who's this? I'm Dr. Reeves from Boston Memorial Hospital. Your father had a heart attack this morning. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Despite everything, the news hit me hard. He's stable, the doctor continued, but he's asking for you. I arrived at the hospital to find my mother in the waiting room, looking smaller and older than I remembered. When she saw me, her composed facade crumbled. She rushed over and embraced me for the first time in years. Alex, she whispered. You came? Of course I came, I replied stiffly. As we sat waiting for news, she showed me her phone, dozens of articles about my rising career, my interviews, my tour dates. She'd been following my journey all along. Your father and I, She hesitated. We saw you on TV last month, performing at that festival. He recorded it. The revelation stunned me. Before I could process it, a nurse called us in to see my father. He lay in the hospital bed, attached to monitors, looking frail and vulnerable. When he saw me, tears filled his eyes. I was wrong, were his first words to me in 3 years. We were wrong. My father's recovery was slow. I extended my stay in Boston, postponing several commitments to be there. Each day at the hospital chipped away at the wall I'd built between us. One afternoon, as I sat with him watching a baseball game, he turned to me with an earnestness I'd never seen before. I watched every interview you've given, he said quietly. That story you tell about being kicked out, it's brutal hearing how much we hurt you. I tensed, unsure if I was ready for this conversation. I was scared for you, he continued. Music seemed so uncertain. I thought forcing you to face reality would protect you from disappointment. He laughed bitterly. Instead, we became the biggest disappointment in your life. For the first time, I considered that their actions, however misguided, might have come from a place of fear rather than malice. It didn't excuse what they'd done, but it helped me understand. As my father recovered, I found myself spending time at my childhood home. It was surreal, being back in spaces filled with so many complex memories. Amber was away at law school, so I didn't have to face her immediately. My mother, in her own awkward way, tried to make amends. She'd kept newspaper clippings about my successes. She'd learned the names of my songs. One evening, I found her listening to my album, eyes closed, swaying slightly. "I always loved your music," she admitted when she saw me watching, even when I pretended not to. Slowly, painfully, we began rebuilding something resembling a relationship. Not the blind obedience they once expected, nor the bitter estrangement of recent years, but something new, a cautious mutual respect between adults. As I prepared to return to my life and commitments, my mother approached me with an envelope. "We'd like to help you," she said, pushing it toward me, "to make up for what we did." Inside was a check for a substantial amount, likely their savings or a second mortgage. I pushed it back into her hands. "I don't need this," I said gently. "I'm doing fine on my own." "That's what I needed you to see." 6 months after my father's heart attack, I received an invitation to Amber's law school graduation. My initial instinct was to decline, but curiosity won out. I wanted to see if the golden child had changed too. The ceremony was predictably formal, with Amber graduating with honors. Afterward, at the reception, we came face to face for the first time in years. The confident smirk I remembered was gone, replaced by an uncertain smile. "Congratulations," I offered, genuine despite our history. "Thanks," she replied, then hesitated. "And congratulations on all your success. I've been following your career." We moved to a quiet corner, away from the crowd. The conversation was stiff at first, but gradually thawed. "I'm sorry," she said eventually, "for how I acted when they gave me your room. For the things I said. I was 16 and selfish and enjoying being the favorite." I nodded, appreciating the apology, but not quite ready to absolve her completely. "Do you know they compare me to you now?" she added with a hint of irony. "Alex is so creative, so passionate, so successful doing what he loves." I couldn't help but laugh at the reversal. Funny how things work out. She studied me for a moment. "Are you happy?" "Really happy." It was a surprisingly insightful question. "Yes," I answered truthfully. Not because of the success or the validation. "I'm happy because I'm living authentically." That's something I had to learn the hard way. Later, as we said goodbye, Amber hugged me awkwardly. "I'm glad you didn't listen to them," she whispered. Or to me. "You were right to follow your dream." That evening, my parents invited me for dinner at home. As we ate, my mother cleared her throat nervously. "We've been thinking," she began. "Your old room, Amber's room, now it's going to be empty with her moving to New York for her job. We thought maybe you might want it back when you're in town visiting." My father nodded eagerly. "We could convert it back to a bedroom. Or maybe a studio space for when you want to work here." The irony wasn't lost on me. The very room they'd evicted me from was now being offered as an olive branch. "Thank you," I said carefully. "But I think that room has served its purpose in my life. I've built my own spaces now." Their faces fell, and I realized they'd misunderstood. "But I'd like to visit more often," I added. "Just as a guest, not as someone moving back in." The relief in their eyes was palpable. It wasn't forgiveness, not completely. But it was a beginning. 3 years after my father's heart attack, I stood on stage at the Billboard Music Awards, accepting the award for Producer of the Year. The spotlight was blinding, the applause deafening, but I could make out 4 figures in the front row, my parents, Amber, and Mira, all on their feet, cheering. "This award represents a journey that started in a small bedroom in Boston," I said into the microphone. "A journey that took unexpected turns and faced considerable obstacles." I paused, looking directly at my parents. "I want to thank my family, who taught me the most valuable lesson of my career, that sometimes losing everything is actually the first step to gaining something greater, your true self." My mother wiped away tears. My father nodded, understanding the complex gratitude behind my words. At the after-party, we gathered in a quiet corner, my unlikely support system. My mother couldn't stop touching my arm, as if reassuring herself I was really there. My father kept introducing me to anyone who would listen, bursting with a pride that once seemed impossible. Amber, now a successful attorney in her own right, watched with amusement. "They display your awards in the living room," she whispered. "Right next to mine. Equal billing at last." Mira joined us, champagne in hand. "To think I found you making lattes," she teased. "Now look at you." As the night wound down, my father pulled me aside. "I have something to show you," he said, taking out his phone. He pulled up a photo of my old bedroom. It had been transformed yet again, this time into a shrine to my career. Platinum records on the wall, magazine covers framed, even a small keyboard in the corner. "We call it the Alex Mercer Museum," he said with a self-deprecating smile. "A reminder of our biggest mistake and our greatest pride." I swallowed hard, emotions threatening to overwhelm me. The room that once symbolized my rejection now stood as testament to my journey. "Keep the room," I said, "but not as a museum. Keep it ready for when I visit. A place to create new memories instead of preserving old ones." My father embraced me, and in that moment, the last shard of bitterness dissolved. We would never forget the pain of the past, but we could build something new from its ashes. Sometimes the rooms we're forced to leave become the doorways to who we're meant to be. My parents thought they were closing a door when they kicked me out, but they actually opened the path to my authentic self. The empty space they created in my life became filled with something far more valuable than security or approval. It filled with purpose, with truth, with the music that had always lived inside me. Now when I visit my old room, I don't see what I lost. I see what I found, the courage to build a life that no one can ever take away from me again.